Good afternoon and Happy New Year. I'm Megan Spinitz, the Chief Operating and Strategy Officer at the Detroit Regional Chamber, here to welcome you and thank you for joining us today for the State of AI. Over the next hour, you will have the chance to explore how AI technology is evolving, its adoption, and its impact on companies across the economy. Today's discussion will be the first of many the Chamber plans to host in 2026 to help your business leverage AI's benefits. I want to thank McKinsey and Michael Chui for partnering with the Chamber and leading today's discussion. Before we get started, I have a few items to note. Michael would like this time to be interactive. If something he says prompts a question, please put it in the chat. He will be monitoring questions and will try to address as many as he can in real time. You may also use the raise hand function if you have a question. Michael will also take questions at the end of the presentation. You can share those questions at the end in the chat as well, or again, use the raise hand function. A recording of this session will be posted on the Chamber's website next week and shared in the eDetroiter. Now, it is my pleasure to turn this session over to Michael Chui, Senior Fellow at QuantumBlack AI by McKinsey. Enjoy.
Thanks, Megan. And thanks to all of you for inviting me to join you today. I'm based here in San Francisco. I have a funny role at McKinsey. I spent a bunch of time as a McKinsey consultant, but now I get to lead research on the impact of long-term technology trends, and particularly AI right now. And so look forward to sharing with you some of the findings from the research that we've been doing. Again, I have the privilege of being able to, interact with thousands of my colleagues in industries and in places including the greater Detroit area, as well as, we have a set of survey research, which I'll share as well. So let's get started. So we've been surveying thousands of executives around the world in their use of AI for nearly a decade now. And so we have this nice longitudinal data set. And quite frankly, what we found is, perhaps unsurprisingly, that more and more companies are in fact using AI on a regular basis. What was interesting, though, is for quite some years, the percentage of companies that said they were using AI on a regular basis oftentimes would had plateaued around 50%. And by the way, during this time, AI was useful for sure, but in many cases, quote unquote, ordinary people didn't really experience it, right? I mean, if someone's forecasting improves, or they have less downtime on their line, or it's used for marketing mix management, an ordinary person wouldn't have noticed. But then generative AI shows up, whether it's ChatGPT or some of the video and image generators, and suddenly this use of AI starts to really accelerate past that 50% plateau that I mentioned before, to the point where nearly 90% of the organizations around the world that we survey, or the respondents from those organizations, say that they're using AI on a regular basis. So part of the story of this, the overall story of this finding is just how widespread the use of AI is, and yet at the same time, how much more headroom there is for companies to use and capture more value from it. Because while we said almost 90% of companies say they're using AI, about 2/3 of them, if you ask on an enterprise-wide level, what stage of adoption are you? They say, look, we haven't gotten past piloting. And so even from a usage standpoint, we have this breadth of usage, but the depth isn't as far there. Now, I'll joke a little bit, and you might say 2025 was the year of the A word, or agents. There's clearly a lot of hype, a lot of buzz around this idea of agents. The way we define them are, AI systems, often based on foundation models, these large neural network models that are designed to act in the world in some form or fashion. And the world might be the virtual world. It could go buy something for you online, or it might be controlling a robot or what have you, and can, generally manage these sort of multi-step workflows, these workflows which are, more than one single thing. And so again, many of us have heard about agents. The vendors are all talking about agents. But when we ask our survey respondents, look, in all of these business functions, who's using agents, who are scaling agents, et cetera, less than 10% in any particular function said using agents. And well, we think that agents are valuable, right? We think that there's great value potential there, but just, there's a bit of a gap between the hype around them and, what we actually observe happening on the ground. With that said, we are surveying again across different industries. We're also surveying across different, business functions. This use of agents tends to be higher, in technology, sometimes media and telecom companies as well, and in certain functions such as knowledge management and IT, those are some of the places where, or service ops, right? Particularly because these chatbots are quite useful on the customer service side, as long as they're working properly. I'll come back to that in a moment. We'll return to the A word. With that said, as I said, the use of AI is continuing to broaden, not just across organizations, but within organizations. An increasing number of organizations are deploying AI across a greater number of business functions. And so again, within organizations, we see that this breadth increasing year over year. And again, this is I stopped. The previous chart was not just agents. This is also not just agents. This is use of AI overall. Um, and so again, we've seen that it's increased. Interestingly, on the industry side, for a long time, it was the technology industry, which was, the heaviest user of AI. We're starting to see other industries move up in their use of AI. So, insurance, media, and telecom are, at the same levels in technology. By the way, there's a ceiling effect here. You can't go over 100%, but we are starting to see more and more industries using AI more and more. Also, we see some differences in terms of their use from a business function standpoint, particularly post generative AI becoming more widely available. Previously marketing, sales, IT, product service development, those are places where you would have imagined even old-fashioned AI coming into play. But knowledge management, it has really come to the fore more recently, and that's because, of course, that these LLMs, these systems are good at dealing with language, which a lot of our knowledge management assets are in language. And so, we do see things changing based on the capabilities of AI over time. And again, we do collect a bunch of demographic data, even though our survey is anonymous. We in fact, as a research team, have debated, look, are we going to see smaller companies leading the way because it's faster, easier, less bureaucracy for them to deploy AI? Or are we going to see larger companies leading the way because they have the minimum scale in order to, hire for these roles, to invest in the infrastructure, all those sorts of things? It turns out the latter seems to be true, which is larger companies are further along in terms of their adoption of AI, to the extent to which over 40% of companies that are have over 5 billion in revenues, have at least reached scaling, if not fully scaled. By the way, I don't think anyone who says they're fully scaled is done, but they've just reached that level where the use of AI has fully scaled within their organizations. So that's a little bit about who is using AI. Let's talk a little bit about the benefits that different respondents are describing their organizations are deriving from AI. This first set of data is really around sort of a qualitative question, which is, look, if you look at your entire organization, which of these characteristics or which of these benefits are you experiencing? The number one thing that we're seeing here is innovation. By the way, we sometimes talk internally about capital I innovation versus lowercase I innovation. This one has a capital I, but we don't really mean it to be that. I don't think, and again, this is a survey, so we're not able to ask the question, the probing questions afterwards. I don't think this just means that it's the innovation function or the R&D function which is benefiting from AI. I think what this means is that wherever AI is being deployed, or in many cases where AI is being deployed, we're able to change what we do, right? But with that said, customer sat, employee sat, competitive differentiation, those are some of the other things that people say, respondents are saying their organizations are deriving from their use of AI. But we also asked not just the qualitative question, but the quantitative questions as well. And so we asked about cost decreases as well as revenue benefits. And so we do see, in many cases, at some level, widespread reports that these technologies are improving the cost position in different organizational units. So whether it's in software engineering, for any of us who have used the software tools to make ourselves more, productive in terms of developing code and generating code, that's there for sure. But again, manufacturing, again, operations functions where people are constantly focused on cost, we do see cost. With all that said, in many cases, the magnitude of the cost benefits tends to be relatively small, and at least in the smallest bucket that we asked about, right? So less than 10%. So again, in terms of there being more headroom, is it possible that AI could drive even more cost reductions in many of these functions? Probably. Similarly on revenue, again, it perhaps unsurprising, perhaps reassuring, you know, from business function standpoint, applying AI in marketing and sales, is one of the is the place which has the potential the greatest number or percentage of companies saying we're deriving benefits from their use of AI strategy and deciding where you're going to play, improving your product or service using AI to do that can also generate revenue benefits. But with that said, again, most of these most of the respondents who say they're getting revenue benefits, or at least a plurality of them, tend to say it's in the smallest bucket. In this case, less than 5% revenue increases. So there's still more opportunity for headroom on this benefit as well. So we not only looked at who's using AI, what benefits are different organizations achieving and at what level, but also look, if there are organizations that really are using AI in the most effective ways, are they doing things differently? And the short answer to that question is yes, they are doing things differently. So we defined a set of companies that we described as AI high performers. And these definitions are never perfect, but hopefully they're helpful in giving guidance to what types of actions underpin high performance using AI. So our definition for AI high performance for the purpose of this analysis was these are respondents who say at least 5% of their organization's EBIT is related to or contributed to from their use of AI. That's one. And secondly, they describe the impact of AI on their organization as being significant. So that turns out to be, when you include both of those filters, it's a small percentage. It's 6% of our respondent pool. But we did find really, really significant differences in their reports about how they actually operate. So number one, at over 3x times higher percentage of high performing organizations by that definition I just described say that their intent for using AI is to drive transformational change. And so this is this case where look, a high aspiration is associated with a high performance. It's probably not enough, but we do see the companies that say, look, we're going to transform our business, not just make incremental change, are ones that disproportionately say they're high performers. Almost, well, if not almost every, but 80+% of organizations say they intend to use AI to drive efficiency. And by the way, we're not saying you shouldn't do that. It is important to continue to improve the efficiency of our organizations. But again, disproportionately, organizations that are high performers say we are also going for growth and or innovation as the objectives for their AI initiative. So again, what are your aspirations? What are you trying to do? We see some of those aspirations being associated with higher performance. And then high performers, almost 3 times X higher percentage, are reporting, look, when it comes to our workflows, we want to use AI to fundamentally redesign them. Again, not just, everyone has a license to use a chatbot or whatever. It is, look, we're going to take some workflows that matter to us, and we're going to say, how can we rethink how that entire workflow can be organized differently, can be rethought, can be transformed because we have this technology associated, available to us. We also, again, I'll come back to the A word just briefly, right? And again, correlation or causation is a good question. I would say that probably the causal area points in the following way. If you're a high performer, you probably are more capable of deploying more frontier-ish types of technology. So agents are new. We do see that the high performers at a much higher level have started to scale their use of agents. And I think it's not the case that, okay, if I deploy agents, I'll be a high performer. I think high performers are better able to bring these new technologies to bear within their organizations. And then leadership really does matter. Again, we can discuss this during the discussion portion, but look at 3x higher percentage of companies which are higher performers say that their senior leaders are demonstrating ownership and commitment to the AI initiatives. This is not just something that the CIO does, not just something that the CTO does. This is something that the senior leaders across the business are saying, this is something that's important. I'm going to role model. I'm going to, take ownership of it. I'm going to make sure that this is something that matters. And, if that weren't enough, some of my colleagues have written a book called Rewired, which is about transformation using technology, including AI, but not just exclusively AI. There are 6 chapters to it. Each of the chapters describes a large number of different practices. We survey on these practices. Basically, what we're finding is that the high performers in double-digit percentage higher percentages, and some guys double the percentages, are implementing these individual. And by the way, this is just a selection. This is not a complete list of these practices. But again, whether it's in strategy, whether it's in technology, whether it's in talent, adoption and scaling, data, operating model, across all these different chapters, organizations that are high performers are implementing these rewired best practices for transformations.
Oh, Michael,
And
you
then
have a
finally,
question.
oh yeah, please.
It says, what does a fully scaled AI organization look like? My department is using it, but I don't know at what level we could say at scale or fully scaled.
Yeah. No, it's a qualitative measure. I would say scaling, so we go through experimenting, piloting, scaling and fully scaled. Um, scaling is just, how are we deploying this technology so more and more people are using it, or it's being used in more and more use cases, et cetera. Fully scaled suggests, look, it is being used as broadly as it can be used. That doesn't mean, again, that it couldn't be used more at greater depth. It doesn't mean that it couldn't capture more value from its use, but that in fact it's sort of reached that level where it's being used across the entire organization.
And another question is, could you please have some comments on applying AI in the banking sector?
Um, I'll have some comments, I guess. I mean, in some senses, banking should be one of those sectors which is, I don't want to say easiest, but um, in some ways best suited for the use of AI. Because in banking, we've always said, look, the factory is the data center, right? There's nothing in a bank other than bits and bytes and people, right? I mean, and so that's also been true. On the other hand, banks often have a lot, not just compliance, but have a lot of other reasons why there's some rigidity to their IT systems, and so that often is a challenge as well. Um, but yeah, no, look, if you go around the world and you look at, the best performing banks, they are using these tools in all kinds of places. So certainly and again, different types of banks, obviously, right? I mean, there's wholesale banking, retail banking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But on the consumer side, using the AI in terms of their marketing and sales, yes, absolutely, that's happening. And that's, whether or not it's personalized one-to-one, individual offers, or whether or not increasingly trying to figure out whether or not it can be used for brand, that's definitely happening. Underwriting, we see that being used in AI being used there all the time. And so, there, I think, one of our observations is if you want AI to capture value, don't run your pilots on something that I don't want to say doesn't matter, but run it on places where it actually matters. Because if you're successful, HR is an important function, right? But like if you use a chatbot to respond to your HR internal requests, maybe it's useful, maybe it'll improve, but that's not going to drive, that the CFO is probably not going to talk about that at the quarterly earnings report. Um, you change your underwriting performance on loans, yeah, that could change things, right? You change your growth trajectory in terms of customer acquisition, that's going to change things. And so, choosing things that matter when you deploy AI, including in banking, I think is one of those things that can make a big difference. So hopefully that helped. Okay, I'll keep going. The only other thing that I'd mention here too is that look, the high performers actually do invest. And again, I don't think this is one of those cases where the causal arrow will point the other way, right? Like, if I just throw more dollars at the problem, I'm definitely going to become a high performer. But at the same time, there is a minimum amount of investment you need to make in order to make sure that, in fact, you can become a high performer. We see the high performers doing that. One other question that often comes up with regard to AI, what does this mean for the shape of our workforces? And so there are a couple pieces of data I'll show you here. Sometimes AI, is associated with a reduction in the size of a workforce in different functions. Sometimes it's actually associated with an increase, right? If you increase demand because you're doing things better, et cetera. In general, what we found is that respondents were saying, whether we've decreased headcount in the past or we've increased headcount in the past year, we expect AI to, you know, level that up. So we're, that's one of those things where AI appears to be an accelerator for things. And then if when we asked about the entire organization, look, the plurality of respondents said, we expect little or no change, to our employee base in the coming year, or the size of the employee base over the coming year. With that said, a lot of organizations have noted, look, if we continue to grow, if we grow revenues and maintain the same headcount, we're becoming more productive, we're becoming more efficient. So, it's not to say that these companies are standing pat because they're not increasing. We do see 13% of the respondents saying, we think AI will increase our headcount, and we see about a third saying it's likely to decrease the headcount in the coming year. With all that said, do we see hiring in the roles that are associated with developing and deploying this technology? Absolutely. Do we see those roles generally being more hiring in larger companies with over $1 billion in revenue? Yes, we see that as well. So they have the capability, the resources to be able to invest on the human capital around AI, and they say they're doing so. And then we also, again, for years now, have been including in our survey questions around the risks associated with AI. And some of those are unique risks. Some of them are, echoes of the past, right? I mean, cybersecurity existed as a challenge, as an issue before AI showed up. But, AI creates, new vectors of attack, also creates new surface areas, also creates new ways to manage and mitigate those risks as well. And so, we ask not only about what risks are you mitigating, identifying, but also have you experienced any negative consequences from these risks? And so inaccuracy or hallucination, you might have heard the term, is the most common negative consequence that companies describe them as experiencing. And yet it is also, the risk that most organizations are working to mitigate. Cybersecurity is high on the mitigation side, et cetera. I think one thing to note is, explainability, the inability to explain why an AI system did what it did, is actually the second most common negative consequence. It is not the second most risk that organizations are working to mitigate. So we think there's probably opportunity there. It's a difficult technical problem, but it is absolutely important. And then finally, we published a different article. Again, these articles are all available for free on McKinsey.com. 6 lessons after a year of agentic AI. Again, our colleagues have built more than 50 plus agentic AI builds, along with touching many other ones within the organizations in which they serve. And so here are just some syntheses of the things that we found. First of all, deploying agents is not necessarily all that easy. I think oftentimes might be say, oh, just throw something in, it'll do everything a person does. It generally is not that true. So, number one, don't get don't get sucked into paying attention to the shiny object, which is this new agent thing that might exist, right? Again, harkening back to the finding from our survey, if you want to change the way an organization operates, if you want to actually capture value, you need to think about an entire workflow, and then where does an agent or agent systems fit within that can transform a workflow that matters. Again, make sure that the unit of analysis, the unit of action is an entire end-to-end workflow, because that's how you can actually capture value. Secondly, just because you have a hammer doesn't mean that that's what you should, be wielding all the time. Agents aren't always the answer, particularly because agents typically are, what we call non-deterministic, or they don't always do exactly the same thing under exactly the same circumstances. They are designed not to do that. Again, because how boring would it be if you interacted with a chatbot and it always said the exact same thing? Except that sometimes in business, you want it to say exactly the same kind of thing, right? Maybe it's a compliance issue. Maybe there are rules associated. You actually wanted the system to do exactly the same. In that case, maybe you don't want to use foundation model-based AI. Maybe you want to use rules-based systems, if-then statements. And so I think we're starting to see a better understanding of, just because agents exist doesn't mean that they're the best solution for every problem. Thirdly, invest in evaluations or evals. Look, evals are everything in terms of the modern AI. If you're not doing evals, you're not doing AI. What does that mean? Look, these systems I just described, they are non-deterministic. One of the powers of AI is how general it can be, right? They can do things that you didn't write a rule for, or you didn't explicitly train it to do. At the same time, if that's true, you need some way to make sure that it's doing the right sorts of things. And so there are lots of different techniques for, creating evals. Sometimes you pay people to write these tests. Sometimes you run these tests. Sometimes you might even, you know, pay people to evaluate the responses. But sometimes you might even use an LLM to judge another LLM's outputs. By the way, that might sound a little bit like fox guarding the hen house. I guess what I would observe is oftentimes I'm better at being able to tell whether or not something's good or bad rather than generating the thing that's new. So again, there are a number of different techniques, but it's important to invest in these evals not only before you deploy, but even after, because many times these systems change, if you deploy a new model, et cetera. What that will allow you to do is build trust with users. It also builds trust with, your organization. You need those evals to be in place. Fourthly, so far, agentic AI doesn't make humans go away. They are still essential, whether it's, writing evals, whether it's deploying, putting the technology in place, or whether or not it's being able to handle exceptions, et cetera. But what they do is likely to change, and how many of them that there are associated with a certain workflow will probably change as well. Make it easy to track and verify every step. Uh, it uh, Again, this comes back to explainability at some level, right? Agents, if they're acting in the world, you want to know why they did that, right? And so the legibility of these systems is actually important. It's a design characteristics. And then finally, the best use case is the reuse case. If you're going to develop an agentic AI system, you should think about whether or not you should invest in to make it general enough that it can be used elsewhere. By the way, that's not always true. So this is a judgment that you develop. People in IT have had this problem all the time. It's an IT architecture question. If I have some component, some tool, do I think it'll be used for more than this thing that I'm building for it now, or not, right? And is it worth investing in that? But those are some of the things. It's just, being smart, and again, it's smart. It's a judgment call. When do you want to invest enough so that I'm building a system that's useful in more than one thing? Sometimes that's going to be true. Other times it's not. And the nuances being able to figure that all out. So with all that said, look, I'll wrap up the slide administration part of this presentation by saying, look, we do see AI being regularly used, very, very widely, but there is so much headroom in terms of the depth of use, getting past this pilot stage, but also all those practices that allow you to really capture value from your use of AI. And I'm going to pause now and see if there are any other questions, comments, challenges. I look forward to anyone who wants to raise their team's hand or send a chat or just speak up. Feel free to jump in. So Michael asked about the copy of the presentation. Rather than the presentation, we will make available to you links to the articles, which are far better standalone rather than a set of presentation pages. What is a common corporate, so this is from Tracy, a common corporate concern that would surprise us? Well, I don't know that there are any corporate concerns that will surprise you because you're all very insightful business leaders. Um, so I don't know if it's a concern necessarily, but I do think that the explainability result that, finding that's, the second most risk that that has materialized within organizations is something that should be paid attention to.
And Michael, you have a couple of raised hands here. I'm going to take the first one off mute. Oops, popping around here. Okay, there we go. Nahi, can you hear me? Go ahead and ask your question. Okay, go ahead, Michael. You can go to the chat. For some reason, it doesn't appear to be working here.
Okay. Do you have any studies about consumer acceptance of AI? No, I don't have a specific consumer study that I have led, but they're out there. So yeah, you can certainly find them as well. Let's see.
Let me just hop in here really quick, Michael. Anyone that's raising your hand, you'll have to unmute yourself in order to be able to ask your question. So
Okay.
please
right.
make sure you unmute. Okay, there you go. Okay, perfect.
All right, this is Hodge Flemings. This has been very insightful. I have a question for you. If we're interested in making Metro Detroit a place where AI can be activated with micro, small, and enterprise level businesses so that it's accessible, what are a couple key takeaways that we should focus on?
I mean, I think the takeaways are mostly on the adoption and value capture side. And so, how do you get people to just use these technologies? I think a lot of people are already using them in their personal lives. But then how do you catalyze their use in business? And I think a lot of that, happens through word of mouth, organizing. When people find, oh yeah, I can do this, I can do that, that's quite powerful. Look out for this, look out for that. Because in many ways, this technology is extremely accessible now. Oftentimes don't need a lot of training, right? Because it speaks language. And so, whatever language you speak, a lot of these AI systems will understand them already. And so I think in many cases it's just, can you get people to experience and then figure out how they can use it in business. And then when it comes, a lot of the practices I described there are, a little bit, large company focused, but they have parallels within small companies as well. And so if you think about what's my high aspiration for what I could do for AI if I'm a small, micro-sized business, I think you can have those types of aspirations. I think you can have those aspirations about how can I do things very differently.
Let me add a little more like context to it. Since we're
Yeah.
working on an actual project for AI capacity for micro businesses. In a micro business, there are differences. You have a lot of 1099. You have people that work for you that are not dedicated employees. So the approach towards a micro business and enterprise business are vastly different because of the narrowness of certain things that they're doing. So that was more the kind of the context. So we're going to deploy training and stuff like that. But I was just kind of curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of time now, like your employment arrangement, and it's not necessarily related to whether or not someone's going to use AI, right? And so I think if you say, look, you know, a micro business might be, generating some type of content, whether it's, advertising or writing or images or whatever, right? And so, I think a lot of folks probably are already using these technologies to do those types of things. And so, on the other hand, if there are limitations, right? I mean, if the micro business is around doing very physical things, yes, people have talked about robots and they're coming and all that kind of thing. But right now, maybe AI is not going to make that big a difference. If you're, repairing things or, those sorts of, I guess you ask questions about repairing things, but, in terms of, supporting the physical movement of things, there's less impact there. But yeah, I think the employment status is not necessarily a barrier to people using AI.
Hi, my question was about the impact on the workforce. And you hear some scary stories about people with bachelor's degrees, especially entry level, no longer really having much of a market for their skills. And the question is, what are you hearing from businesses and employers about who they're hiring? And if for the people that they do hire with the degrees, what sort of skills are they particularly looking for?
Yeah, I mean a few other things. I mean, we recently published this another article. You can find it as well. AI, robots, and us. Skills for the future. And one of the fastest growing skills on job descriptions are skills that are about the use of AI. And so, um, candidates who know how to use AI in whatever field they are operating in are likely to be advantaged in the market. With that said, yeah, I mean, as you said, there are some statistics that show challenges around recent college graduates, et cetera. And so that is those are challenges that will have to be overcome in our labor forces. But I think the skills that we've for specific roles, there are definitely specific skills associated with every role. But I guess this continuing change is something that. And it might not be a skill that employers ask for explicitly, but the ability to adapt, to learn, as these technologies change what people do and the workflows, as I described it, are changing, is some of the things that will be important. And then there are some things that the machines just don't do all that well yet. And so if you're really great at them, whether it's leadership or understanding people's emotions and thoughts and feelings and all those sorts of things, those are skills which are important as well.
Thank you.
Great. How would AI be utilized in the security guard sector? I mean, I think it can be a force multiplier in the sense that the sensory AI systems that can interpret video can be quite powerful and are being used, I think, by the technology providers of those sorts of technologies. I mean, I live in San Francisco, so I mean, we've had these security guard robots driving around for a while. I don't know how effective they are, but yeah, I mean, I think certainly from a sensory standpoint, you can have a lot more eyes than you ever had than the two that you have on your body. So that definitely is there. How my department can this from Bonnie. Yeah, I mean, all the things that you just mentioned there, which are summarizing data, writing, computer programming, those are some of the things that are definitely can be used. It's writing it. You can create not just written documents, but images, etc. So yeah, a lot of different things. I'm not sure what your department does, Bonnie. I don't know if you want to jump off the mute and let me know. Well, if not, feel free to add to the chat or come off of it if you get a chance. Okay, Joel, how is AI different from previous? Oh, Bonnie, is that you? No. Okay. How is AI different than the previous use of rule-based approaches? So this takes me back. A lot of times, they're in the long history of AI, there was a lot of use of rule-based systems, basically nested if-then statements is one way to put it, but symbolic AI, logical AI, using these technologies, which basically, implemented rules to create some level or type of intelligence. Broadly speaking, the alternative was using artificial neural networks. These are models that are loosely based on how the brain is connected with all, many neurons with different connections amongst them. And so that was different in the sense that, there was no explicit representation for a word, an object, or what have you, well, within the net itself. And those neural networks, like when I started, a few dozen neurons was a decent sized network. Now we're talking about billions of different weights between neurons, or even higher. And so the difference there is that rather than encoding all of these rules, you trained it on data, right? So you might have heard, for instance, these large language models being trained on, all of the language that anyone can, search on the web, for instance. And so, incorporating all that data into these large neural networks had surprising properties because suddenly they could do things that you didn't train it to do, right? It could, translate from, Hindu into German, even though, I wasn't, writing any rules about, how the grammars in those languages change or are different. And so, it's sort of the machine learning approach, which is, data-driven training rather than rule-based encoding. And so, but each are better at different things, right? Because in this training it on the world's the web, basically predicting the next word in a sequence. That's not very good at math, right? It's not very good at arithmetic because being able to predict the next word in a sequence doesn't necessarily mean that I can do arithmetic well, whereas calculators do arithmetic really well and they're very simple. So each has its pros and cons, but that's the sort of the AI deep learning technology is basically these massive artificial neural networks that are trained on huge amounts of data. Joel, hopefully that gets to your question. All right, let me come to Trina's question here. Is it worth paying for a platform or computer package to do particular things and experiment or evaluate to find solutions for your own business or organization? It can be. Just depends on the price and what you want to use it for. So many of these AI systems have a free tier, but oftentimes you can unlock more capabilities by paying for them. And so I think it just depends on. In this case, it's not different than any other technology, right? That you just have to make the evaluation for your specific application as to whether or not it's worth it to pay. Hey, Brett, have you performed the same research for educational and governmental sectors? And if so, do the results? I might have said companies, but our survey does go to governmental and NGOs as well, so including educational institutions. And so yes, the results are very similar. Again, with individual, particularly in terms of the use cases that different organizations deploy, they are different depending on the sector, and that's true for education and government as well. Let's see, what are the educational career pathways available for college students as well as the workforce? Michael, can you say more about that? In some ways, the educational pathways are the same, I guess, but I don't know if you're asking for people who want to develop AI technologies, or if you're asking, look, if AI technologies come to bear on the workforce, how would that change how people need to be educated? We'll see whether or not you want to come off mute or send another text. Let me go to Gassan's question here. What basic AI competencies would be expected of college graduates? Look, I actually think this is one of those things where if you just first of all, I think a lot of college graduates just are using it, right? They might be the leaders in using these technologies anyway. So, but yeah, just using them, I think is one of the most useful things that you can do. I think in many cases the college graduate will be more attuned to how to use these technologies than their hiring managers will be. But just as long as they're using them. Now, this is a very good question from an educational standpoint. How should students be using them depending on the class you're in? Ever since ChatGPT showed up, people have talked about cheating and all those sorts of things with regard to essays. On the other hand, when you do reach have a job, many times you want to use these technologies. So how do you make sure that people learn as learn what you're trying to teach them, whether it's English, physics, history, at the same time, learn how to use technologies which will be important for them in their careers. Do you recommend corporations block DeepSeek? I don't think I can give one answer for that. I think every organization needs to make its own decision about what they want to do there. There are obviously policy questions as well, but I don't think there's just a single answer to that. Let's see. So maybe similar. Was there something about who owns the major AI platforms, about the competition between China? Seems more lean AI and the West more expensive AI, and who owns the data? All of these questions around the intersection of geopolitics and AI are important, debated, and by the way, matter not just at the level of, foundation models and who's providing the services, but also, as people know, at the chip level, data centers, data localization. In many ways, there's the old saying that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. That there are other versions of these questions that people have asked about data and applications and infrastructure previously. So yes, all of those are very, very active points of discussion at the policy level, but also if you're a business decision maker, you have to navigate these as well. I did see a hand come up and then it went back down. Did somebody?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Michael, you're right on point with the college students knowing more about AI than the instructors, mainly because of everything you just said. They want students to be deep thinkers. They want students to create their own work. They want students to show their work, how they got there. And these tools are so far advanced that the instructors don't know how to grade it, don't know how to teach it. So I'm in the process of working with some community colleges across the country. One right there, not far from you, the Maricopa County Community College system, on developing programs to help students to develop those skills that will help them become more employable. We haven't gotten there yet. There seems to be the big fight between faculty and administration and how these tools can impact the institutions. We don't know a lot about that just yet. I'm still writing the dissertation on it, but if possible, I'd like to pick your brain at some time in the future to include some of your comments in that paper.
Well, let's figure out how we can connect, and if I can be helpful, I will be.
I'll send my email to you in the chat.
Okay, great. All right, what percentage of expenses should a bank in emerging markets spend on AI? Oh yeah, there's no one precise number for this. Again, we do have some benchmarks that we can share if it's helpful, but there's sort of a minimum efficient scale that you probably need. So depending on the overall revenues or expenses of the company. But you might have seen the previous, chart that we showed. That shows high performers spend a high percentage. But again, I think it's more important rather than just setting the budgetary envelope, but how is it that you're using this technology, and then you get it to how much the expense is, rather than saying, look, I'm going to spend X% and therefore I'm good. How are organizations addressing situations where leadership is enthusiastic about AI, but maybe misinterpreting the data it produces? Well, that's not good. Hopefully the rest of your organization is trying to inform the leaders that if there are issues around the interpretation of data, organizations that are effective have leaders who understand the data. So, Alex, I don't know if there's something else that you want to jump in on there. I'll keep going, but you should feel to jump in. So Jesse's question about the relationship between AI and intellectual property and best practices to maintain confidentiality. So a couple of things. One is it's useful to have a contract because those are enforceable in our well, hopefully in our legal systems. And so if you have a contract which talks about the confidentiality of your intellectual property, that can help as well. Sometimes you also want to deploy technical methods. Those, again, if you're a large organization, you'll have more capabilities to be able to do that, whether it's encryption or auditing technology and all those sorts of things as well. But it is important. With that said, I think it's also useful to understand. I mean, one thing I might not have mentioned, for instance, right, that these large language models typically have a context window, which is a set number of tokens or words within which you can have a conversation. Oftentimes these are very large, so you can have a very extended conversation. But once that context window collapses or goes away, or if there's no memory, then in many cases, you might have a log trace somewhere of the conversation that somebody had, but the system, it is not generally the case that if I'm having a conversation with a chatbot, that all of that quote unquote knowledge sort of gets sucked into the model, because models generally their weights don't change after they've been trained, which I don't think is also always understood. So I think it is, I'm not saying that it's not fair and smart to make sure you're thinking about confidentiality and intellectual property and protecting it. But also I think it's worthwhile to understand the technology so you know exactly, what the risks are, and what you need to do to mitigate. I see. Hodge, again, coming to your question, will they invest in training workers that are not permanent employees? That's a great question for every business to try to figure out, right? By the way, this applies not only in 1099 workers. How much is an organization going to invest in the training of employees? Because employees aren't bound to stay at your organization; they can leave too. And so I think it is a great question. Now, oftentimes it comes down to, look, what's the value proposition I want to have for someone who's working with me, if they're 1099 or if they're W-2. Is training part of what I provide in addition to wages? And is that valuable to me? Is that valuable to them? I think that is a question that existed before, again, to this point about, the history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. But it's important here when it comes to AI. Okay, let's see. Relationship between healthcare payers, hospital systems, and providers. Well, lots of different ways. Again, I talk about the A word, agents, particularly between payers and providers. I mean, you can imagine a world in which agents are talking with one another in the same way that right now, different individuals are talking with each other about transactions. So that becomes a weird world where basically you have these software robots, negotiating things with one another. And so I do think that's a world that in some cases is already here. I think we'll see more and more of it. But when it's really interesting when it comes to patients too. I mean, so many of us use these systems to ask, health related questions. And so that becomes, providers already, were worried about people showing up with, the results of their web searches when they come in for an appointment. Well, now you have people who have had extended conversations about their health with some of these systems. So, again, I think within the healthcare space, we're going to see more and more of these, really interesting interactions. But it's not all risk too, right? There's tremendous benefit that's possible as well. We know that provider individuals are strained in many cases because of staffing, et cetera. And if these systems can reliably, effectively, and safely, make it possible to, and we see this already, right? Whether it's note-taking, transcription, all those sorts of things. These technologies hold promise to help for healthcare providers. Was there any concentrated use of specific agents by business classification. I'm not sure what that means. I'm not sure what you meant by business classification, but there are, there are types of tasks where we see agents, we see, quite frankly, on the vendor community, developing more and more agents. So for instance, software coding, we do see these coding agents, which in some cases can go and code for hours. That's happening. Customer service is another classic case where, at least for level 1 support, having agents be able to respond. Again, at varying levels of quality. Some work really well, some don't work that well. Those are a couple places where, we see a lot of agentic products as well as deployments. Sentiment analysis. Being practical. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you mean a live, video on a live audience in an auditorium or, I guess during a keynote. Yeah. I mean, I think you can, this in theory can work. I'm not sure exactly. I don't know. I'm presenting to you all now. I'm not sure what would be useful to me, right? Like happiness level of participants. So yeah, I mean, there are systems that can quote unquote read faces. People would have to come off video mute for that to work, etc. But you can also read faces in an auditorium. But I'm actually not sure how useful that would be. The technical hurdles are, just getting the data in, having sufficiently high resolution, and then paying for all the compute to do it, and ethical, is it ethical to go and read faces technically? Great question. Philosophical questions here. Are students learn deep thinking? Fight applicants who use AI and employers use AI. Yeah, I don't know if you have to fight. These are tools. And so it depends on what you're trying to teach, right? I mean, again, history repeating itself, but not, and rhyming, right? It's like calculators exist. We still want to teach people how to do arithmetic. And so in some cases, we constrain their ability to use these tools. In other cases, we absolutely expect them to use these tools. And I think being clear about what you're trying to teach and what tools you want to allow people to use is what will make things really important. I know we're coming up on time. I don't know if there's a last question or two, but otherwise it's been a privilege to be able to be with you all. What are the energy costs associated with computational workflow? Not a component of the benefits. Not a component of the benefits considered for use cases. So, I mean, for most people, the energy costs are not transparent if you're an end user, but they're part of, they're built into the cost of whatever you're paying for. But yeah, I think people are very aware that this is a huge issue. A lot of data centers out there, they consume a lot of power, and it's a lot of incremental usage, right? I mean, in many cases, it's not, these didn't. This need didn't exist before, so it's huge. On the other hand, there's a lot of work in terms of reducing the per token cost, per token energy consumption, etc. But we're just using a lot of tokens, so it's a big challenge. A lot of people are working on it, and a lot of the policy side and the energy marketplace side, etc. So it's a big deal. And with that, I know we're coming up on the end of the time, but I do want to thank everyone for your attention. I want to thank you for your participation and thank you for the invitation to join all of you.